Over the years, we've done a number of stories about wrongly convicted prisoners who get exonerated when a crusading attorney takes on their case. In prisons around the world, however, that rarely happens. In Kenya, for example, more than 80% of inmates have never been represented by a lawyer. Justice Defenders would like to change that. It's an organization started in Africa by a soft-spoken 37-year-old lawyer named Alexander McLean. Justice Defenders has worked in 55 prisons in Kenya, Uganda, and the Gambia, giving legal training to hundreds of inmates who can then help their fellow prisoners, the innocent and the guilty, get a fair hearing in court. They are also helping some prisoners get law degrees, and as we found out when we visited Kenya before the pandemic, the results have been astounding.
The story will continue in a moment.
Thika Main Prison outside Nairobi is a miserable place, built almost 70 years ago to hold 300 prisoners. When we visited 3 years ago, there were more than 1,000. In this one dank holding cell, 140 men were packed tightly together, the air thick with the smell of sweat and urine. They'd been accused of everything from trespassing and robbery to assault and murder. Some have already been convicted, but most have yet to stand trial. They can't afford bail, so they'll likely have to wait here for years.
Good afternoon, brothers. Our work is to help people who don't have lawyers to access justice.
That's Alexander McLean, the founder of Justice Defenders, which has been working in Kenya's prisons for 13 years.
How many of you have a lawyer?
2, 3.
Just 3 men in this group of more than 200 prisoners have an attorney.
We think it's a problem that often poor people go to court without defense.
Defending the defenseless is at the heart of Alexander McLean's mission.
Most of the people who are in prisons in Kenya don't come to court knowing their rights, knowing how a court works.
You might meet people in prison who think that the police are the ones who've convicted them of an offence, or they've never had a copy of their judgment, so they know that they've been convicted, but they don't know exactly what of and why. And so our hope with our work is that we give people fair hearings. So even if they're convicted or they're given a prison sentence, afterwards they say, well, that's fair because my voice has been heard.
Morris Kabiria was sent to Thika prison in 2005. He was a police officer and was accused of stealing a cell phone and credit card.
How much time did you end up in pretrial detention, waiting for your trial?
8 good years.
8 years?
8 years, from 2005 to 2013.
In court, he claimed he'd been framed because he didn't pay a bribe to a superior officer. The judge found him guilty of armed robbery and gave him the mandatory sentence, death.
The death penalty for an armed robbery?
Yes.
When the verdict came, do you remember that day?
Very much. When the judge sentenced me to death, to suffer death by hanging, I just saw blackness everywhere.
McLean took us to Langata Women's Prison in Nairobi, where Justice Defenders has trained 47 inmates to be what they call paralegals. They're given a 3-week law course which enables them to teach other prisoners about bail, court procedures, and rules of evidence. The paralegals also prepare petitions and write appeals challenging inmates' convictions and sentences.
What year did you arrive here?
Jane Manyonge became a paralegal 5 years ago. She was a school teacher when she was charged with killing her husband, who she says was abusive. Convicted of murder, she too was given a mandatory death sentence.
You didn't know your rights?
Never.
How courts work?
Yeah, never. And that's what propelled me to join the paralegal. That legal basic knowledge that I get, it goes a long way. You don't need a degree to draft somebody an appeal or something like that.
How does that feel?
You feel that you are still a human being, even if you are here. You can do something to change somebody's life.
Alexander McLean began volunteering to help others as a teenager, growing up in South London. His father was Jamaican and his mother is English. He first went to Africa when he was 18 to do hospice work in prisons and hospitals in Uganda.
We went onto this ward, and by the toilet on the floor, I saw a man lying on a plastic sheet in a pool of urine. And for 5 days, I washed him and tried to advocate for him. Came the 6th day, and he was lying dead and naked on the floor.
It's not something a lot of people, I think, would volunteer to do.
I guess that sometimes in life we see things that we can't unsee, and then we have a choice as to how we respond to them. Because every person has gifts and talents and something to contribute to our society. Our society can only flourish when the inherent worth of each person is valued.
After returning to London and graduating from law school, he could have gotten a high-paying job. Instead, in 2007, he started a charity to improve conditions in African prisons. At Nairobi's Committee Maximum Security Prison, a notorious and sometimes violent place, he met George Karaba, who was on death row for killing a man in a dispute over land.
I remember the first thing that we asked was how he can be able to provide us with reading materials.
So McLean began collecting whatever books he could find for the prisoners.
My sense was that books could transform us and transform our circumstances and take us to a different place.
9, 10, 11.
Prison authorities had already started an academy of their own, with classes from first grade through high school, teaching math, English, science, and religion. And with McLean's help, they turned a room at the end of a cell block into a library.
You can't imagine the happiness. You can't imagine.
Just from a book?
Yeah. Because when I start reading this book and it's actually enlightening me, it's like now I'm being opened up to the outside world. It started giving us hope.
McLean wanted to do more than just improve life in Kenya's prisons. He wanted to make sure those accused of crimes had a fair hearing.
Often it's people from backgrounds of privilege who become lawyers or become politicians and make the law, but it's the poorest people in our societies who disproportionately feel the impact of the law. And I wondered what it looked like to tap into that lived experience.
So in 2012, McLean arranged with the University of London Law School for inmates to begin taking a 3-year correspondence course, the same one Nelson Mandela took when he was in prison. To qualify, they have to pass an entrance exam and have a track record of helping other prisoners while they've been behind bars.
So even if they may have murdered somebody and have a life sentence, if they have transformed themselves in prison, if they are serving others, they might be able to qualify.
Yes, because we believe that there's more to someone that's killed than being a murderer, or more to someone that's who's stolen than being a thief. I don't think any of us has to be defined by the worst thing that we've done.
Remember Morris Kibiria, the cop in for armed robbery? He enrolled in law school and found the learning curve steep.
I had never touched a computer in my life before I went to prison.
Really?
Yes. I touched the first computer in that law class.
Were you all right?
In some ways, they are like law students anywhere. In the chapel at Committee Maximum Security Prison, we watched as they held a moot court, a mock legal hearing where they role play, arguing cases with all the gravitas and grandeur of a real Kenyan courtroom. Some prisoners play prosecutors.
The society as a whole needs protection.
Others, the defense.
It is better to acquit 9 guilty suspects than convict 1 innocent person.
There's also a defendant.
We proceed.
And prisoner judges to render a verdict.
The appellants have proved the appeal.
You may have noticed prison guards in attendance. Remarkably, some of them are taking law classes as well. Willie Ojolu is the chief inspector at Langata Women's Prison and just completed his University of London law degree.
I don't know that I know of many guards in the United States who train to become a lawyer so they can give legal advice to the people they're guarding. It's pretty unique.
Wow, it sounds unique, but that's what happens here. You know, people are brought to prison as a punishment, but not for punishment.
I've never heard it phrased that way. So your goal is not to punish them, but
to help them improve on their life and manage their life properly so that they don't get in conflict with the law.
3 years ago, inside Committee Maximum Security Prison, there was a graduation ceremony the likes of which no one here had ever seen. 18 inmates, former prisoners and guards, received their University of London Law School degrees. George Karaba got his, and while he may spend the rest of his life in prison, he says he's been transformed.
If I do not get out of prison, I'll still continue doing what I do.
To see somebody you've helped get out of prison,
It gives me great satisfaction.
does it feel like part of you goes out with that person?
I feel part of me is actually out, and therefore I'm good.
George Karaba and others helped Morris Kabiria appeal his death penalty conviction. Kabiria argued the case himself and was stunned when the judge acquitted him of all charges after 13 years in prison.
I felt like I did not hear right. So I asked her, what? She told me, hey, come on. I thought you were a lawyer.
You didn't believe what she was saying? You wanted to see it in
I
writing?
don't believe it can happen that way. Because it was not even in my mind.
First impression is very important.
Morris Kabiria was freed, but when he got out, he went right back to prison as a full-time employee of Justice Defenders. Here he is teaching inmates a lesson he learned in court firsthand. Always look the judge straight in the eye.
Don't just lie low. Don't keep quiet. It might affect your defense or your case.
Justice Defenders says since we visited Kenya, they've provided more than 37,000 legal services to prisoners and seen almost 11,000 people released. This was Pauline Njeri's walk to freedom after 5 years in prison for fraud.
Yes, thank you, darling, for coming.
Her daughter was there to greet her.
Some of the people that your paralegals are training have committed very serious offenses.
For sure.
Do they really deserve a chance to get out if they've really committed those crimes?
We're not determining sentence. Those who are guilty of offences should be punished, and the punishment should be proportionate, and it should be viewed towards equipping them one day to leave prison and to contribute to society. But those who are innocent shouldn't be wrongly punished.
Justice Defenders relies entirely on donations and spends about $2 million a year helping inmates. They've begun trying to expand their work into other prisons in Africa, Europe, and the United States.
We have a shared hunger for justice.
Already, their impact in Kenya has been profound. Morris Kabiria was part of a team of Justice Defenders who successfully challenged the constitutionality of Kenya's mandatory death sentence. The law was changed, and as a result, thousands of death row inmates became eligible for resentencing.
That must feel extraordinary.
Extraordinary. I love law. I love law. I eat law, I drink law, I love law.
You eat and drink it?
I completely, everything. I do everything with law.
Listening to you talk about the law, it sort of makes me excited about the law.
Yes. Let me tell you, Cooper. You know, there is one thing we do. We make assumptions as people, as a society, and we dig our graves through those assumptions. Law is not for lawyers. Law is not for the government. Law is not for some people somewhere or the rich. Law is for everyone.
In the coming weeks, 100,000 inmates will have been advised by Justice Defenders. With their planned expansion into new prisons and countries, they aim to serve 1 million prisoners by 2030.